Before we start this video, a large thank you to Kyrie, Conmio, Tony Sims, Graham, Jesper, Jimmy, Nikos, and Zanji for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video, and welcome back, Zanji. Hello everybody, today we're going to sync our left and right weapons across the network. This same logic can be applied for equipment if you'd like to try it yourself, but I am going to cover it as well. So let's go to the character network manager and make a header, and then we're going to make two network variables, both integers, for the left and the right weapon ID. Now you probably remember a while ago when we made the save system, we can only save basic variable types. So because of that, we had to assign items an ID. So when we loaded the item, we got the item depending on the ID from our world item database. Well, we're going to do the same thing with network variables. We're going to basically assign an ID for the left and right weapon. And depending on what that left and right weapon is, we're going to load those weapons on the character's hand if they are a connected client and not the character you are playing. So let's go to the character weapon slot manager on load weapon on slot. I'm pretty sure we're going to have to do this on the player weapon slot manager too, because I don't think we call the base version of this function. Anyway, let's do that, and let's say character.character network manager dot current left hand weapon ID dot value equals weapon.item ID. So when we equip a weapon, we're assigning the weapon ID of that weapon to our character network manager variable. Do the same thing for the right hand, change left to right. Now down below here, this is called if the weapon is null or if it's not there basically, and then we would assign the unarmed weapon. So instead of just saying the weapon ID, let's just go to the world item database instance and let's get the unarmed weapon item ID. I'm just going to create an actual variable for this so we can just grab it really quickly. So it's not made right now, so you're going to get an error, but just paste it down here and change left to right. So if you don't have a weapon, we're grabbing the item ID of the unarmed weapon from the world item database. So first, let's check to see if we're the owner. So we're going to say if character is owner before we change this network variable, because you can only change this if you are the owner. So here's how it's going to go down. When you're the owner, you're going to switch weapons on your end. It's going to update your network variable for the weapon ID, and then on the other end, the person's going to receive that weapon ID update, and then they're going to change the weapon on their end for your character. So this is just quite simply how it's going to be done. We're going to use an onValueChanged call like before, and we'll get to that shortly. So we're going to say if character.isOwner, again, paste this logic inside here, and it's the same. And then we'll go and make that unarmed weapon variable shortly. So if character.isOwner, there we go. And let's save that and move on. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to Unity and I'm going to search up the world item database. And let's just make anywhere you want here a public weapon item variable. And we're going to drag the unarmed weapon in here. So public, whoops, not unarmed, weapon item. I believe I called that unarmed weapon. Let's save that. Yes, I did. Okay, there goes the error. It's gone. I'm just going to move that actually. Not have it below the list, but above the lists. Now, we're also going to make it in a bit, so we're going to auto-assign an ID for each of these items because manually assigning them all would get really confusing, and if you accidentally put in the same value twice, that's going to break some stuff. Well, not break some stuff, but it's going to cause some problems. So first, let's go to the character network manager. I'm going to make a comment here for weapon switching. I'm going to make a public void. I'm going to call this onRight weapon change. And I'm going to have an int for the old and an int for the new because this is mandatory if you're calling onValueChanged. And what we're going to do is say weapon item. I'm going to call this new weapon is equal to world item database instance.getWeaponById. And we pass our new weapon ID. Now that shouldn't be null. So if this is not null, which it shouldn't be ever, we're going to say character weapon slot manager dot, and then we're going to just basically load this weapon. So we're going to say load weapon on slot, and then we're going to pass the new weapon, and it is not on the left hand, so we're going to say false. Then copy this entire thing and say on right weapon changed, or sorry, on left weapon changed, and then change the false to true. And there you go, that's the left and right hands covered. Now we need to call this, or both of these functions. So we're going to say if the character is the owner, return, because remember, we're already switching the weapon on the owner's side. So we only want to call this if the character is not the owner. Because like I said before, I switch on my side, it changes the network variable. And then on your side, my character switches their weapons to what I have on my end. So if we're the owner, we've already switched. We don't need to run this logic. We can return. So I'll make a comment here. This function is called on character object connected to other clients. We return if we are the owner because the weapon switch has already happened on our end. Much like the play target animation, it's the same idea as that. We've already played it on our end. We don't need to play it again. So we don't need to switch the weapon again on our end if we've already switched it. So let's go to the player manager now, and we actually have to call these on value changed events. So we need to make it so every time we change the left or right weapon value, that changes. So let's say player network manager dot current right hand weapon ID dot on value changed plus equals player dot player network manager dot on right weapon change. I thought we already made one of these using on value change, but I must be thinking about the Elden Ring series. So I guess we didn't. So player network manager dot current left hand weapon dot on value change plus equals player network manager dot on left weapon change. What does this do? Well, basically every time that number changes, it's going to call that function and pass the new and the old number. Just think of it like an event. So let's go in now and drop in our all of our weapons into our world item database. Now let's open this up. And like I said before, right now we have to manually assign every item ID. That could get really bad really fast. So let's change that. Let's make a public list, call it item, or a public list of items, and call it all items. And then on awake, what we want to do is take every list we have. So right now it's just weapon items and equipment items. We want to add them to the list of all items. So we're going to say for each item in weapon items, all item dot add each individual weapon. And then do the same thing for each item inside of the equipment items. Then we're going to add those items to the all items list. And why are we doing this? Well, now we can basically go through every item in the all items list and assign it a unique item ID just using a number. So we're going to keep it super simple. So basically this will be the same on both ends because it's going to be called in the same order because of the script on both ends. So basically what I'm trying to say is that your item IDs are never going to change. They're only going to change if you change the order that they're placed in these lists. So it will always be the same throughout for both the client and host. So no worries on that end. Now, finally, we use this all items list to give each item its individual item ID or a unique item ID. And this makes it so you don't have to put them in manually every time you make a new item. So basically, it's going to go through the list, and let's say the sword is first. The sword will get the item ID of probably 0, and then the shield is next. The shield gets the item ID of 1. So it's just going to go down through the list, and as it gets to each item, it's just going to add 1 and assign that as the item ID. So we say all items I.item ID is equal to I, and that's it. Let's save that. Now make sure every one of your items that you're using in-game is in this list. That's very important. Otherwise, you will have a problem seeing this because it won't be able to update via the netcode. So what I'm trying to say is if you have an item that is not in this list, it won't show up if you have it on your character but not in this list. So I'm going to save the world item database prefab, and I'm going to just go back over now and go back to my code. And let's go down to the load weapon on slot function and copy this logic and also paste it in the player weapon slot manager because we don't call the base logic. So whatever you've done here for the basically character.character network manager, paste that on the player weapon slot manager. I could go over these honestly and just make them more uniform, but for now this is fine. No need to go back and change things when we can just copy and paste this. It's all the same. I know it's different here because we're doing stuff with the UI, so that's why it's not calling the base logic and it's calling its own. All right, so after you've done that, make sure you save that, and we're almost ready to test this out. Let's go back into the game. I didn't have my bow object here. I need to find that because I'm pretty sure that's on my character, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to save the scene, and I'm going to open up my clone real quick of the project. Won't actually start it up yet, though. So let's go in here and just go to add new clone, or sorry, open a new editor. I'm going to drag this over. There it is. Okay, so now let's press play. Now, if I go into the game here now, press start, new game, I'm just going to move my character over. Now, if I drag in the clone and drop him in, I'll do this as well. Press start, new game. There we go. I'm connected. So I'm going to run over here now, and you can see that if I switch the weapon on one of these characters, it should switch for me. And yes, it does. I switched to a bow. And now you can see in the host, I can see the bow. So that's working as intended. But we do have a problem. What happens if I join the game after a character has already switched. And what I mean by that is that I'm not there for the switch. The switch has happened before I've connected. So I'll give you an example of that in a sec, and I can show you exactly what I mean, because right now as it stands, it's not going to work, but we're going to make that work. So if I'm standing up here now, you can see I have nothing equipped. Now if I drag this client over and I shut down the network and then rejoin, you can see they have a sword for me, because basically this on value changed only calls the load weapon function if the number has changed. And the number has not changed while I've been connected. It was already changed. So basically what I'm trying to say is this function is never called again to update the weapon. We can basically remedy that by making it so when you connect to a game, you call all these functions once. So what I'm trying to say is when you connect as a client, you're going to go through each other player's network variable and then load the weapon on their hand depending on what the network variable is, only when you join. So that way, if it's something different than what it would be normally, you're just going to refresh everything, if you will. And you're going to load everything on that player's character one time when you connect. So I'm going to call, or rather create a function called load other player character when joining online. And I'm going to make a comment for loading weapons. So we're going to make this require a player manager, a player variable. We're going to say player.playerNetworkManager.onWriteWeaponChange. We can just call that like a function. We pass 0 because we don't need the old weapon slot, the old weapon ID. And for the new weapon ID, we pass player.playerNetworkManager.currentRightHandWeaponID.value. And this is as in the player you're trying to load these items for. Do the same thing with the left. And now we have to have a way here. Make sure you change right to left. We have to have a way here to basically get a list of players in game. This is quite simple. We're basically going to utilize an on client connected call. So there's no override for that. That's my bad. We're going to make a private void. We can call this on client connected, and we're going to add this to an event when the client connects to the server. We're going to make it require an Oolong client ID. So this is just a variable for the client ID itself. And then on network spawn, what we're going to call right here at the top, this is important, right at the top after base, networkmanager.singleton.onClientConnected callback plus equals onClientConnected callback. So basically when a client connects, we're also going to call whatever is in this function right now. And what are we going to do? Well, let's put a debug.log to make sure this is working correctly. We're going to say client connected. And then if you want, you can even pass the client ID. So I'm just going to say client ID and then plus and pass the client ID variable. Okay, so what we want to do is basically add the connecting client to a list of players in game. So we keep a list of who's here and who's not all the time. So let's go to the game session manager and let's just make a list of player managers. So right below debug or above debug join game, wherever you want to, because we're going to eventually delete debug join game. Players in game. And then I'm going to make a public list player manager, and you can just call this players. And we're going to say equals new list player manager. Now let's make a function to add and remove players to this list. So public void add player to active players list. And let's make that require a player manager variable. And all we do is say if players does not contain the player you're trying to add, because you don't want to add the same one twice, then we're going to say players.add, and we pass that player. And then right below that, we want to iterate through the list and check for any null basically areas in the list. So if you remove a player, it's going to remove them from the list, but that slot in the list will still be there. It will just be empty. We don't want that. We want the list to only contain player variables. And if there's no player variable in the slot in the list, we want to remove the slot in the list. So we simply say for I, or int I equals players.count -1. If I is greater than -1, then we say I minus minus, and then we say if players I is equal to null, then we say players dot remove at I, and this just removes that position in the list that is empty and does not contain a player. And then back over here on the player manager, we say game session manager, because we can call it as it is a singleton. And then we're just going to call our new function where we add a player and we pass this player. Okay. Looks good. Now what we want to do is if we are not the server and we are the owner, So this basically means if we're not the host, because the host is always the first one connecting, so we don't need the call list for if we're the host. So if we are not the host, but we are the owner of this object, so we are connecting client. So basically the person controlling this specific player object, what we want to do is say for each player inside the total active player list, then we just want to call if player does not equal this, because we don't want to load our own equipment. We're going to say player dot load other player character when joining online. There we go. And we just pass the player. Okay, we're almost done. Let's go back here to the character network manager, and we're going to say if the weapon does not equal null, we're going to say character inventory manager right weapon is equal to new weapon. So if we don't assign the right weapon and the left weapon before we try to load the weapon, it will not work. So just come here and replace right with left again. And then it should be fine because load weapon on slot is going to load the weapon from our slot. So now if I go into the game and I have a bow equipped, when I join with this connected client, I should see the bow and not the straight sword, because it should call that when I load in, I have to load all other players' equipment. So if I come over here now, you will see that yes, I do indeed see the bow. So that is working as intended. There you go, guys. You can apply the same logic to the equipment system for like your helmet, your chest plate and stuff, and I encourage you to do so and take a whack at it now that you have the knowledge to do so. If you want, as always, though, I can't cover that, and I do intend to, but if you guys want me to skip it because now you already know how to do something similar, I can do that, and we can get into something else. So leave a comment below. If you don't want me to skip it, I will do, in the next episode, all the equipment slots, the helmet slot, the chest plate slot, the leg slot, etc., etc. And if you guys are cool with that, I will move on and start syncing effects like things like take damage and, backstab and riposte and all that good stuff. So thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. I hope you guys learned something. And as always, don't forget to leave a comment and a like. It does genuinely help out the series so much. And beyond that, I will see you guys next week.